Imagine an empire so vast, the sun never set on it. A tiny island nation that shaped the laws, the language, and the future of the modern world. This is the history of the United Kingdom, a tale of blood, power, revolution, and resilience. But wait, before you think this is just another boring history lesson, let me ask you this. What do a Viking invasion, the birth of democracy, the Industrial Revolution, and the Beatles all have in common? They all happened here. From the legendary King Arthur to the brutal Wars of the Roses, from Queen Elizabeth I's golden era to the dramatic Brexit saga, this is not just history, this is the origin story of a global superpower. And by the end of this journey, you won't just understand the UK, you'll understand the world. The origins, ancient Britain to Roman invasion. Long before it was known as the United Kingdom, before London was a global capital, and even before England, Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland had names, there was only an island, cold, untamed, and wild. Its earliest inhabitants, hunter-gatherers, roamed the dense forests and rugged hills. Around 800,000 years ago, the first humans walked this land. They left behind tools, bones, and stories lost to time. By 3000 BCE, Neolithic people had begun shaping the land. They built Stonehenge, a structure so mysterious its purpose still sparks debate today. Was it a temple, a celestial calendar, a burial site? What we do know is this. Long before written records, the people of Britain were already making their mark on history. Then came the Celts, fierce warriors, artists, and storytellers. They spoke a common language but were divided into tribes. Each had their own leaders, customs, and gods. The land was fragmented, but proud. But in 43 AD, the tides changed. The Roman Empire, the most powerful force on Earth, turned its gaze toward the Misty Isle. Led by Emperor Claudius, the Romans invaded, beginning a conquest that would reshape Britain forever. Roads were built. Cities were founded. Londinium, modern-day London, was born. But not everyone welcomed the Romans. One name still echoes through time. Boudica, the warrior queen of the Iceni tribe. When the Romans wronged her, she fought back with a fury that brought cities to their knees. Her rebellion was bold, but ultimately crushed. Despite the bloodshed, Roman Britain flourished. Roads connected the land. Trade expanded. Architecture, law, and language began to transform the island's identity. But empires do not last forever. By the 5th century, Rome was crumbling, and with its retreat, Britain was once again vulnerable. And in the ashes of Rome's fall, new invaders would rise, the Anglo-Saxons. They would shape the names, the myths, and the nations we know today. The birth of England, Anglo-Saxons to Vikings. With the Romans gone, Britain stood exposed, and the storm was coming. In the 5th and 6th centuries, waves of invaders arrived from across the North Sea. The Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, Germanic tribes seeking new lands and fresh conquest. They came as warriors, but stayed as settlers. Roman towns crumbled, and a new culture rose from the ruins. These tribes brought their own gods, languages, and laws, and over centuries, their kingdoms began to take shape. Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Wessex. But change was on the horizon once again. Christianity returned, not from Rome this time, but from Ireland and the European continent. Monks like St. Augustine and Aidan brought light to the so-called Dark Ages. Then came the fire. In 793 AD, the monastery at Lindisfarne was attacked. The Viking Age had begun, and it would leave Britain scarred and forever changed. For over 2 centuries, Norse warriors from Denmark, Norway, and Sweden launched brutal raids. But they didn't just plunder, they stayed. They farmed, traded, and carved out their own kingdoms, including the powerful Danelaw in the east of England. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms fought back, and in the face of chaos, one leader would rise to unite them. King Alfred of Wessex, later known as Alfred the Great, a warrior, a scholar, a visionary. Alfred didn't just defend his land, he laid the foundation for what would become England. He promoted education, built fortresses, and forged alliances. Under him, the idea of a single English nation began to emerge. As time passed, battles gave way to treaties. Cultures blended, languages merged, and a new identity was forming, neither purely Saxon nor wholly Norse. But peace is fragile, and across the sea, a new power was rising in Normandy, one that would soon change Britain forever, with one arrow, one battle, and one name that would echo through the centuries. Conquerors and Kings 1066 and the Norman Legacy. A year that changed everything. Edward the Confessor, King of England, dies childless. 3 men claim the crown: Harold Godwinson, the powerful English noble; Harold Hardrada, the fierce Viking King of Norway; and William, Duke of Normandy, a ruthless leader across the Channel with a promise and an army. First came the Vikings. Harold Hardrada invades from the north, but is defeated by Harold at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The English celebrate. But while Harold's army bled in the north, William landed in the south. October 14th, 1066, the Battle of Hastings. A single day, that would decide the fate of England. The English fight bravely, but fate turns when an arrow, or perhaps a sword, strikes King Harold down. Leaderless, the English fall. Victory belongs to William. On Christmas Day, William the Conqueror is crowned King of England. A new era begins, one of castles, control, and calculation. The Normans reshape the land. Castles rise like stone fists across the countryside. The feudal system chains society in a strict hierarchy. And the Domesday Book, a great survey of the kingdom, gives the crown control like never before. The language of power becomes French. The church grows stronger. And English culture becomes a rich blend of Anglo-Saxon roots and Norman refinement. But power breeds ambition. Over the next centuries, kings rise and fall. England wages wars abroad and at home, and slowly, the kingdom evolves. The Plantagenets, the Magna Carta, and the clash of king and church. What comes next will shape the very idea of monarchy, law, and liberty. Kings, crusades, and the birth of law, the Plantagenets and Magna Carta. With the Normans firmly in power, a new royal bloodline emerged, the Plantagenets. For over 300 years, they would rule England, and in their rule, the kingdom would expand, rebel, and reshape its very soul. It begins with Henry II, a brilliant, complex king. He ruled not only England, but more land in France than the French king himself, ruthless in battle, but obsessed with justice. Henry transformed the legal system, introducing royal courts, common law, and trial by jury. But even kings clash with power they can't control. His greatest conflict came with the church and his former friend Thomas Becket. Their bitter feud ended in blood when 4 knights, perhaps misunderstanding the king's rage, murdered Becket at Canterbury Cathedral. Becket became a martyr. Henry, haunted, and England, forever marked by the tension between church and crown. The Plantagenets were warriors. Richard the Lionheart, Henry's son, led crusades in the Holy Land, while his brother John, ruled in his shadow. John's reign was a disaster. He lost land, raised taxes, and angered the barons. In 1215, they forced him to sign a document that would echo through history, the Magna Carta. For the first time, the king was not above the law. The Magna Carta planted the seeds of liberty, fairness, and limited government. It was not a full democracy, but it was a beginning. Over time, the concept grew. Kings began to consult with the councils. Parliament, a body of nobles and clergy, took root, and slowly, painfully, the balance of power began to shift. But peace was fleeting. The Plantagenets were far from done with drama. Power struggles, royal marriages, and the 100 Years' War with France would soon erupt. And from within their own family would come the deadliest conflict yet, a war of roses, blood, and betrayal that would tear the crown in two. Lines and 100 Years' War and War of the Roses. In the 5th century, England stood at a crossroads. Its kings claimed land and thrones far beyond their own borders. And with one bold declaration, England plunged into one of the longest wars in history. The 100 Years' War. A conflict not of 100 years exactly, but 116 years of shifting alliances, sieges, and bloody battles, all sparked by one claim: the English crown had a right to the throne of France. At battles like Crécy and Agincourt, English longbowmen devastated French knights. These victories became legend, raw proof of English might. But war is never simple. Victory turned to stalemate, and in the shadows, a flame of resistance was rising. Joan of Arc, a teenage peasant girl who claimed visions from God. She lifted French spirits, led armies, and turned the tide against the English. She was captured, tried for heresy, and burned at the stake, but her legend never died. By the mid-15th century, England's grip on France collapsed. Only Calais remained, a ghost of an empire that could have been. Abroad, civil war erupted at home. Two rival branches of the Plantagenet family, the House of Lancaster and the House of York, turned on each other. Their prize, the throne of England. The Wars of the Roses, a brutal series of conflicts where brother fought brother and no crown sat safe. Kings were made and unmade. Henry VI was crowned, then overthrown, then restored and killed. Then came Richard III, ambitious, ruthless, and surrounded by mystery. Did he murder his young nephews in the Tower of London to seize the crown? History may never know, but his reign ended in 1408 at the Battle of Bosworth Field. There, Richard fell, and a new dynasty was born. Henry Tudor, Henry VII, took the throne. He married Elizabeth of York, uniting the two warring houses under a new symbol, the Tudor Rose. The wars were over, but peace had a price. What followed was a reign of brilliance, betrayal, and a king with 6 wives who would tear the church from Rome itself. The Tudors: power, passion, and reformation. In 1485, the last Plantagenet king lay dead on the battlefield, and from the ashes of civil war, a new family seized the throne, the Tudors. Their rule would change not only England, but the world. Henry VII brought stability to a broken nation. He ended the chaos of the Wars of the Roses and filled the treasury. But it was his son, Henry VIII, who would carve his name into legend. Henry VIII, tall, charming, brilliant, a king destined for greatness. He loved music, sport, war, and above all else, legacy. He needed a son. His queen, Catherine of Aragon, gave him one daughter, Mary, but no male heir. And with that began the storm. Henry demanded an annulment. The Pope refused. So Henry broke from Rome, declared himself head of the Church of England and married Anne Boleyn. But love turned to suspicion. Anne gave him another daughter, Elizabeth, and then lost her head, literally. In total, 6 wives, 2 divorced, 2 beheaded, 1 died, 1 survived. And through it all, Henry reshaped religion, law, and the crown itself. After Henry's death, the throne passed to his only son, Edward VI, a boy king guided by Protestant reformers. But he died young, and England swung back under Mary I, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, who returned the nation to Catholicism by fire. Bloody Mary, they called her. Hundreds died. Faith turned to fear. Then came Elizabeth, daughter of Anne Boleyn, the Virgin Queen, brilliant, bold, and fiercely independent. Under Elizabeth I, England found its soul. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 secured its place as a naval power. Art flourished, a golden age of poetry, music, and theatre. Shakespeare gave voice to the nation. But Elizabeth never married. She left no heir. And when she died in 1603, so too did the Tudor line. A new dynasty would rise, born from the Scottish hills. They would unite 2 crowns and soon face gunpowder, revolution, and civil war. The Stuarts, Union, Uprising, and the Civil War. 1603. With the death of Elizabeth I, the crown passes not to a Tudor, but to a Stuart. James VI of Scotland becomes James the British of England, uniting 2 thrones under one monarch for the first time. James was a scholar, a believer in divine right, the idea that kings answer only to God, but not everyone agreed. In 1605, a group of Catholic conspirators plotted to blow up Parliament. Their plan, to assassinate the king and his government in one fiery blast. The Gunpowder Plot. On the night of November 5th, Guy Fawkes was discovered guarding explosives beneath the House of Lords. He was tortured, tried, and executed. To this day, Britain remembers, remember the 5th of November. After James, his son Charles took power, proud, devout, and dangerously inflexible. He believed he ruled by divine right, but Parliament believed otherwise. Tensions erupted. Charles tried to arrest his own MPs inside Parliament, a moment that shocked the nation. England was at war with itself. Royalists loyal to the king, parliamentarians, Herreras demanding limits on royal power. The English Civil War tore families apart. It was brutal, personal, and deeply political. And in the end, Parliament, led by Oliver Cromwell, prevailed. For the first time in English history, a reigning monarch was put on trial by his own people. Charles was found guilty of tyranny. On January 30th, 1649, Charles was beheaded outside the banqueting house in London. The monarchy had fallen. England became a republic, a commonwealth ruled by Cromwell and his Puritan vision. Strict laws, no fun, no king, just order and fear. But without Cromwell's iron will, the republic crumbled, and in 1660, the monarchy returned. Charles the Merry Monarch, restored joy to a weary nation. But the scars of civil war remained, and the story of rebellion was far from over. Fire, plague, and revolution, the glorious revolution and the birth of modern Britain. 1660. After 11 years of republic and the religious rule, the monarchy returns. Charles II, the Merry Monarch, reclaims the throne, promising peace, laughter, and liberty. He brought back theatres, fashion, and festivals, but he also faced disaster. In 1610, the Great Plague swept through London. Over 100,000 died. Fear gripped the city. A year later, in 16th, came the Great Fire of London. For 4 days, the city burned. St. Paul's Cathedral collapsed in flames. But from the ashes rose a modern London, rebuilt, stronger, cleaner. When Charles died in 1680, the crown passed to his brother, James VI, a Catholic king in a Protestant kingdom. James tried to promote Catholics into power. Parliament feared a return to tyranny. Then, a son was born, a Catholic heir, the tipping point. In secret, Protestant nobles invited William of Orange, James's own son-in-law, to invade. William landed with an army. James fled. And in 1688, without a single battle, England changed kings. This was the Glorious Revolution, bloodless but revolutionary. William and Mary accepted the throne, but also Parliament's terms. They signed the Bill of Rights. For the first time, monarchy was not absolute. Power was shared, Parliament was supreme, and the seeds of modern democracy had taken root. As the 18th century approached, Britain stood on the edge of transformation. A union was brewing. An empire was rising, and revolutions far beyond its shores would soon shake the world again. Union, empire, and the age of revolution. 1707. The Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Scotland were united by the Act of Union, creating Great Britain. But the Irish question remained. Ireland wasn't yet part of the Union. While Britain united, its empire expanded. The British East India Company, the slave trade, and colonial ambitions took Britain to every corner of the globe. By the mid-1700s, Britain controlled vast overseas territories: India, the Caribbean, North America. The global network of trade and resources fueled Britain's rise. And in Britain itself, the Industrial Revolution was transforming everything: factories, steam engines, coal mines, and railways. Britain became the world's first industrial power. But empire and industrialization came at a cost. The Napoleonic Wars, a struggle for control across Europe, became Britain's greatest test in the early 19th century. At Trafalgar in 1805, Admiral Nelson's victory cemented British naval supremacy. Napoleon's defeat marked the end of one era, but the world would not be still. Back home, unrest simmered. Ireland, still seeking independence, erupted in rebellion, crushed by British forces. The Irish question remained unresolved. In the Americas, Britain's grip faltered. In 1780, the 13 colonies declared their independence, a revolution that birthed a new nation, the United States of America. After years of fighting, Britain lost its colonies. It was a blow to national pride, but it also began a rethinking of the empire's future. In 1837, Queen Victoria became the longest reigning monarch in British history. Under her rule, Britain reached the height of its power. The British Empire became known as the empire on which the sun never sets. India, Australia, Africa, the Caribbean, Canada, all fell under British control. It was an age of grandeur and glory, but also of exploitation, inequality, and injustice. At home, the Industrial Revolution had created stark divisions. The working class endured terrible conditions, and the poor lived in squalor. Reformers pushed for change. Over time, Parliament responded with reforms. The Reform Acts expanded voting rights. The Chartists pushed for universal suffrage, but the rise of political movements was only a part of the story. In Ireland, the Great Famine of the 1840s devastated the population. Starvation, disease, and British indifference caused the death of 1 million and led to waves of Irish immigration. Across the empire, colonial subjects began to demand independence. The First World War, 1914-1918, would be the breaking point for Britain's imperial dominance. The end of empire, world wars, decline, and the modern UK. The early 1900s. The British Empire was at its height, a superpower, ruling over 1/4 of the world. But dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. 1914. The world plunged into war. World War I, a conflict that would alter the course of history forever. For Britain, it was a war of attrition. Millions of lives lost in the trenches of France. The war tore through Europe, leaving destruction in its wake. And while Britain stood victorious, it came at a terrible cost. The Treaty of Versailles ended the war, but it sowed the seeds for another conflict. The world was unstable, and the wounds of the First World War would lead directly to the Second. 1939. World War II. Once again, Britain was thrust into global war, this time against the forces of Nazi Germany and fascism. The Blitz, air raids, and a nation united in defiance. Winston Churchill, Britain's new Prime Minister, rallied the people with his powerful speeches. "We shall never surrender." The Battle of Britain raged in the skies, while British forces fought on every front. In 1944, Britain played a pivotal role in the Allied invasion of Normandy, D-Day, the turning point that would lead to Nazi Germany's eventual defeat. Victory came at a price. Britain's economy was shattered, but from the ashes of war, a new social contract emerged. The National Health Service was born in 1948. For the first time, healthcare was made available to all. It was a moment of national rebirth, the promise of a better, more just Britain, where every citizen was cared for, regardless of their background. But while Britain rebuilt, its empire crumbled. After Monarchy, colonies around the world began demanding independence. India broke free in 1940s, Africa and the Caribbean followed suit. The winds of change were unstoppable. The British Empire, that had once spanned the globe, was slowly being dismantled. India, once the jewel of the empire, gained its independence, and soon many nations would follow. In 1906, the Suez Crisis revealed Britain's diminished global power. The failure to maintain control over the Suez Canal marked the end of Britain's status as a superpower. The world had changed, and so had Britain's role in it. By the 1970s, Britain faced economic decline, industrial strikes, and political unrest. The country seemed to be in crisis. The old certainties of empire and dominance were gone. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister, the Iron Lady, a symbol of British resolve and change. Under her leadership, Britain underwent profound transformation. The economy shifted towards free markets, while unions clashed with government reforms. In 1982, Britain fought the Falklands War to reclaim the islands from Argentina. A decisive victory that proved Britain still had the will to fight for its interests. The 1990s brought new challenges. The Cold War ended, and Britain adjusted to a new global order. The United Kingdom played a crucial role in the formation of the European Union, though questions about its future remained. The 21st century brought terrorism, global conflicts, and new political debates. Britain faced the challenges of globalization, immigration, and the question of its place in Europe. In 2016, Britain voted to leave the European Union, a decision that would reshape the nation's future. Brexit marked the beginning of a new chapter for the United Kingdom. Today, the United Kingdom stands at a crossroads. A modern nation, proud of its past, but focused on building its future. With a rich history, a dynamic culture, and the resilience of a people who've weathered centuries of change, the UK continues to evolve. If you've ever wondered how such a small island could have such a massive impact on history, stay with us till the end. And if this journey opens your eyes, hit that like button, subscribe for more epic deep dives, and let us know. Part of the UK's history blew your mind the most. History isn't just about the past. It's about understanding who we are today. Let's dive in.